Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Rati here. So guys, I'm really bad at dramatic intros, so we're going to get straight to the point. And today I've come back with a book review yet again. I'm going to review The Life Impossible by Matt Haig. Matt Haig is a famous British author, most well known for his work The Midnight Library, which has been a bestseller. The Life Impossible, which I'm going to review today, is his latest book. Now, before I start the review, a little bit of a disclaimer. Most reviews of The Life Impossible that I've come across on social media and elsewhere try to do a sort of a comparative analysis with The Midnight Library because obviously that's such a famous book. But I haven't read The Midnight Library as yet, so my review would be kind of a standalone review. Now, guys, I don't want to reveal the plot of The Life Impossible as such, but you need to know a little bit about the story to be able to understand the themes predominant in this novel. So, The Life Impossible revolves around the life of a 70-plus-year-old British woman called Grace Winters, who is a mathematics teacher. She teaches mathematics at a local school. She's also undergone a lot of tragedies in her life. She's a widow. She lost her husband recently and had lost her son in a tragic accident a long time ago when her son was still a kid. So these memories keep on haunting her. But on the surface, she's a very uptight, no nonsense, sober kind of a typical prototype of an elderly British woman. And like I said, because she teaches mathematics, so Grace Winters is like, for her, logic is everything. And anything that she has to believe in life, any incident, any experience that she encounters, for her, it has to stand the test of logic and rationality. But her life takes a 360-degree turn all of a sudden as she receives a letter from somebody, and she barely knows this woman. It's a colleague she had worked upon with once upon a time and had extended an act of kindness to her once upon a time. But beyond that, there's no sort of friendship, nothing, no contact for like years and years. But she receives a letter from this woman all of a sudden, and the contents of the letter are shocking to say the least, because this woman gives her entire property to her after her death in Ibiza, property as in her house and all her belongings in that house. Now, obviously, Grace Winters, like any of us, would be totally spooked that this woman, who is literally a stranger and whom she didn't even remember, how come she's sort of like leave her entire house to her, and in a Spanish island where she knows nobody, where she has no whereabouts. So she's totally spooked out, and she tries to forget about it and close the matter. But something seizes her, and she takes this adventurous plunge and decides to travel to Ibiza. And then once she reaches Ibiza, that's where the real story begins. She sees the house and she meets new people, and a new life of adventures begins where your very sober, uptight, and no nonsensical Grace Winters, her whole life turns a 360-degree, and she ends up something happens, that she ends up saving the nature, and she ends up saving the nature and biological nature and ecological diversity of Ibiza. Now, how does she accomplish this task? How does this happen? What all events unfold on the magical journey to Ibiza? For that, you'll have to read the novel. So that's in a nutshell the kind of like the plot of the book. Now, for reviewing this book, I am going to sort of explore certain dimensions about the novel theme-wise. So the first theme, which is the most predominant in this book, is magic realism. Now, magic realism, as a lot of you might already know, is a style of writing. It's a technique of writing where, everyday mundane objects or situations of, everyday kind of mundane reality are invested with a certain kind of a magical and extraordinary appeal. The girl next door, for example, is invested with certain supernatural, magical, almost paranormal qualities. And, the whole it's a mixing of the everyday and the magical and the supernatural. So it's that kind of writing where the main plot is of everyday. The main plot will be, in a very usual place, in a usual town, and it will be of everyday realities, but somehow everyday realities rendered magical. So Matt Haig makes very good use of magic realism. although his magic realism, his brand of magic realism, is somewhat different from the way, somebody like, let's say, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who is best known for his works in magic realism, like Love in the Times of Cholera or like 100 Years of Solitude. So the way Marquez uses magic realism, Matt Haig uses somewhat different. Because if you see Marquez's writings in, be it in Love in the Times of Cholera, 100 Years of Solitude, there's unending descriptive prose, and, it's completely seemingly no nonsensical descriptive prose. And you have to just, kind of like, Marquez makes you see those things, see what's happening to the lives of the characters instead of telling you. There's no philosophizing or sermonizing. Whereas in Matt Haig's work, the magic realism is also, it's also a lot of philosophizing and telling you all about the motivations of the characters and what they are trying to do. So there's a lot of this reflections and philosophizing bit in Matt Haig's The Life Impossible. But Matt Haig, like I said, makes very good use of magic realism. At least that's what I think. The moment you sort of start reading the book, and the moment Grace Winters travels to Ibiza, it's just it's a bizarre, magical, and a kind of a supernatural kind of a world. And you can totally sort of, sense the world and with all your senses, and also visualize it. So he's very strong visual writer, very strong visual element also, I think. The second most predominant theme I think, which is there in The Life Impossible, is the trope of memory. Now, the trope of memory is again a very common kind of a writing technique, which is utilized in a lot of works of fiction, which basically means, that the prime character, the protagonist, has some kind of an identity crisis, or, they carry some kind of burdens from their past, some past trauma or some past sufferings and pain, and how they deburden themselves, and how, their life sort of evolves after that, or in the light of that past trauma. So this kind of theme, this kind of preoccupation is there in a lot of novels. So the Life Impossible also makes very good use of the trope of memory. The way the narrative moves forward, the prime protagonist, the elderly British woman, Grace Winters, she's completely burdened by her memory. And, it's like the book can be classified at a level as a Bildungsroman of Grace Winters. Of course, it's not a literal Bildungsroman in the sense that Grace Winters is already 70 plus when the novel began, but it's a psychological Bildungsroman, because there's a vast difference. There's a sea of difference between Grace Winters' mindset when the book begins and her mindset, when the book ends, when you close the pages of the book. So it's this evolution, mental, psychological, whatever you call it, evolution of Grace Winters that's been traced in The Life Impossible, and it totally makes very good use of the trope of memory, because the constant references to her trauma, and her trauma literally shapes everything. Her past trauma literally shapes everything in her life, including how she recovers from it. The third most interesting thing about The Life Impossible is this constant dialogue, this constant, this theme of, sort of a constant, this is constant questioning of boundaries between science and art, logic, rationality, and intuition. Things which are generally considered as binaries, as diametrically opposed to each other. The book has this predominant theme that these things are actually interconnected. So science and art is actually interconnected, and the binaries between logic and intuition are also, superficial. Intuition beyond a certain point is also a kind of logic, and logic beyond a certain point cannot be there without the powers of intuition. So this, it's a very interesting philosophical dialogue going on in this book. And because Grace Winters is a mathematics teacher, and a very passionate one at that, so, there's a lot of reflections on mathematics in the book, and how her own mindset changes. Initially, the world of Ibiza, she thinks it's completely crazy and mad, and this kind of magic, it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense to her mathematical self. But slowly she realizes that mathematics is not just about finite concepts, but it's also about infinity. And the world of Ibiza, with all its seeming chaos and madness, has a hidden order which is ultimately what is mathematics is all about. No matter how chaotic things seem on the surface, there's an underlying unity, there's an underlying hidden order to everything. So that there are these complex philosophical concepts which the book has explored very beautifully, which I found very fascinating. Especially, I feel the narrative voice questions these false dichotomies between, like I said, science and art, and logic and intuition. The fourth most predominant theme in the book is the environment. Now, in the Life Impossible, environment plays a crucial role. And when Grace Winters reaches Ibiza, what she ultimately does is that she saves the environment and ecological diversity of Ibiza. So the whole book is full of beautiful, very beautiful, vivid environmental description of the environment of Ibiza. And it's almost magical because the environment, is not just some passive entity sitting there, but the environment of a place, the way book describes Ibiza, embodies the soul of the people of Ibiza. So this kind of almost psychic bond between the nature of a place, the psychology of a place, and the psychology of its immediate inhabitants is portrayed beautifully in the Life Impossible, and especially this beautiful description of the marine life under the sea, very beautiful, vivid, rich imagery. You'd absolutely enjoy reading it. Also, I think, a lot of considerable research has gone into the making of this book, because from what I've read about the book, a lot of places which I mentioned here, most places which I mentioned here are kind of real places, and those problems of ecological diversity, of, sort of environmental degradation, which are being faced in Ibiza, are also real problems. A lot of research has also gone into the making of this book. And like Matt Haig says himself, said in many of his interviews that he's traveled to Ibiza a couple of times, and he's himself attached to Ibiza. So there's this autobiographical element also there. Maybe not in the story, but, in the whole feel of the book, because there's this emotional connection of the author to Ibiza, which he's himself acknowledged. So yeah, I think the nature plays a very predominant role in this collection. If you're a nature lover, especially if you love the marine, environment, you definitely fall in love with this book. I especially, I was fascinated by the way animals are described, the way animals and reptiles are described. They're generally described as not just, having a life, a consciousness of their own, but as also being infinitely wiser and more intelligent and more sensitive than human beings. Finally, the most predominant theme about this book, I think, is optimism. The sheer optimism that runs through the pages of The Life Impossible is the most important takeaway of this collection, I think. Because I've come across a lot of books where the trope of memory is used, but ultimately, something happens that the protagonist ends up, being more melancholic than they were initially. Somehow the plot takes a very postmodernist kind of a turn, and the end result is also melancholic. I'm not saying anything about those books. Those books are also brilliant in their own right, but I love the shared optimism and exuberance that shines through the pages of The Life Impossible. It's almost when Grace Winters travels to Ibiza, the sheer optimism, the sheer over the top enthusiasm, it completely, the way it rubs off on her, it rubs off on on the reader as well. And if you read the book with a lot of intensity, then at least for the time being, by the time you reach the book, just like Grace Winters is a different person, you are a different person as well. So, I just completely love the tone of optimism in this book. This was the things which I liked about the book. Now, things which I didn't like so much, or which I think can change, although there are not so many of them, but just very quickly. So the first thing that I think the author could have worked upon is the fact that I felt that, when Grace Winters travels to Ibiza and, when she's living there, the author is constantly telling us, that she's happy and she's changing and this and that. But somehow we don't see that transition happening because there's, too much emphasis. The plot is very pacey. And, all of a sudden we jump into Grace Winters fixing things and saving the environment and this and that. So we get no time to really see, how she's settling in her life there, to see her doing any normal stuff like partying or, whatever. Just sort of, kind of sensing the environment and emotions there and how her life is changing. It's always like she's on a mission. So, somewhere I think that transition is missing. I would have liked to see more of, uh, I would have liked to, rather than the author telling me constantly, I would have liked the author to show me through her actions, or through some storytelling, that how is Grace Winter's life changing in Ibiza. So that's one thing. The second thing I think is that, there's a lot of philosophizing, uh, and there's a lot of philosophizing and reflections at times. And sometimes you think, it just gets on and on. It can get on your nerves. And you think, I'd rather skip these portions and I just want to know what's happening next. So there's a lot of repetition also of those themes. So here I think the book could have been tightened a bit and the philosophical bit could have been reduced a bit. That's what I think. It can be a bit overwhelming for the reader. Thirdly, it's again a similar kind of criticism. I feel, the book has, especially the second half, almost too many themes, coming together. So although I personally liked it, but I think for somebody who's used to more kind of focused storytelling, it can be a bit overwhelming at times for those kind of reader. So guys, overall, I completely recommend the Life Impossible by Matt Haig. I think it's a beautiful book and you should definitely check out. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the content, please do press the like button and please do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.